Good evening. Welcome to Silicon Valley Buzz, a show about innovation in Silicon Valley. My name is Jim Conor. Tonight's show is going to address the issues around Parkinson's disease. It's a very debilitating disease, and it's affected many, many Americans, I believe 1.8 million or so. My guests are Dr. Barlow and Joy Chesbrough from the Parkinson Institute and Clinical Center. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You both have been involved in this industry for a long time. It's a very big commitment you've made. Let me start with you, Dr. Barlow. How serious is Parkinson's disease? Is it progressing? Are we getting our arms around it in a certain sense? What's the current status?
Yeah, so for people who don't know much about Parkinson's disease, it's not one of the big diseases like Alzheimer's that are affecting 8 to 10 million people, but it's not a small disease like, say, for example, Lou Gehrig's disease, which affects just a few 100,000 people. Parkinson's is about right in the middle. About 1.5 million people are affected by the disease, and there's a lot of things that people don't understand about Parkinson's disease. A lot of people think that, for example, Parkinson's is a disease of older people, and it's not. The average age of diagnosis is in your 50s, and we have patients that come to the Parkinson's Institute who are 30 years old and have Parkinson's. 40s, quite common. And then we have people who aren't diagnosed with Parkinson's until their 80s. So it's a complex disease that is very debilitating, but with really great care, people can have a very good quality of life. And then also, with the research that we're doing, we hope that we can find a way to stop the disease quickly.
So, as I read about it, it's a neurodegenerative disease, and I believe, in my everyday language, that means the nerves are degenerating and the signals are not going from the brain to the muscles. Is that correct?
Close, very close. Well done, also. So it is a neurodegenerative disease, and it's a disease that progressively kills the brain cells in the brain, but it also kills the nerve cells in other part of our body. And what happens is that when those nerve cells are dying, it's not everywhere in the brain, it's only in a very specific part of the brain. So when you have Parkinson's disease, it's very difficult for you to move, to initiate a movement. But once you're moving, your body knows how to move. It's this concept of, I need to move, and your brain signals to another area of your brain, and that's what tells you to move. So it's a problem between the brain to neuron connection or nerve cell to nerve cell connection, not a problem between the nerve and the muscle.
For a person that has it, let's just use my glass of water here. If I say to myself, I'm thirsty, I'm going to have a glass of water, does my hand not move? And I said, come on, hand, get to the water. I need you to grip the glass. And then finally it happens, or is there some other process?
Yeah, so for people who don't have Parkinson's disease, all you have to do is feel thirsty and your hand just moves to the glass. You don't even have to think, I'm thirsty, therefore my hand needs to move towards the glass. It's very automatic because all of the nerves are connecting to each other very nicely. So it's a very smooth and fast rhythm. You're not even thinking about it and your hand is moving towards the glass. With Parkinson's, the part of the brain that makes that effortless is the part that's damaged. And so when you think, I'm thirsty, all of a sudden, the part of your brain that would send an automatic signal is sending it, but there's nobody there to receive it. And so the person's thinking, I want a glass of water, but nothing is happening. I'm not getting to my water. So then the person has to use a different part of their brain to do a workaround. And then they do the workaround, which then gets them to move their hand to the glass. So think of it like this. You're on the freeway, and there's a big accident. You can either just sit there, stalled on that freeway until there's an accident, or you can start thinking, I need to get to work. I'm going to go and take this off-ramp, and then take that side street, and then I'm going to do this side street, and then I'm going to get to work. In Parkinson's disease, there's a permanent accident on the freeway. And in order for them to get to the glass of water, they have to go across all the side streets. So it takes longer to get there. It's not smooth, but they ultimately can get there.
Can I learn how to do that and go to that process every time, or is it a new learning experience every time?
You can learn it, and that's one of the reasons it's so critical when your brain is at its most healthy state. it's best to learn all those backup pathways. Why it's so incredibly important that as soon as you're diagnosed, you get to what's called a movement disorder specialist. That's a neurologist who spent all the training to be a neurologist, but then spent extra years becoming a specialist in movement disorders. And when you see a movement disorder specialist, they know all of the tricks. They know how to help you with medications to keep your brain healthy so that it can do all the work around. And then there's specific types of physical therapy, speech therapy, and other forms of therapy that are specialized for Parkinson's that insurance companies and Medicare pay for. And they're designed to help you get those workarounds going. And so there's intensive therapy, and then you should stay in training classes to keep your brain practicing. And that's a big component of what happens in Parkinson's. I mean, everyone knows they should exercise, right? But in Parkinson's, it's way more important because it's helping you practice getting on those back roads. And if you stop practicing, your brain forgets how to do those back roads.
What about speech?
Speech is a very important component, is motor. It's how you, your vocal cords are controlled by muscles that move it in and out. The strength of your voice is controlled by motor movement. And so many people with Parkinson's, one of the first signs that they see is my voice is getting softer. And people are saying, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. But the patient's thinking, I'm working really hard to make my voice be strong. But it's not. And that's because the motor component that's doing the moving to the glass is also driving your vocal cords. And so that's why we have something called LSVT loud. It's a specific form of therapy for Parkinson's that teaches patients how to exaggerate everything. So in Parkinson's, if you know people with Parkinson's, everything starts to shrink. Their steps get smaller. Their movements get smaller because it's so hard to make a movement. The voice gets weaker. Even the body posture gets smaller. And the physical therapy and the speech therapy is designed to make everything big, talk louder. And so you'll hear at the Institute when they come for their therapy, you can hear them shouting at the top of their lungs and the therapist just louder, louder. And then that way when they leave, they know how to keep forcing their brain to remember to speak louder. And the same with what's called LSVT big. They're in there and they're exaggerated movements with their arms and huge steps. And that's what's teaching the brain to do the workaround. That's called synaptic plasticity or neuronal plasticity, where the other part of the brain can learn new things to help with the part of the brain that is degenerating.
That's fascinating material, and I really want to thank you for getting through that because that's quite a foundation, which we need here. So, Joy, welcome.
Thank you.
You are the fundraiser, I believe, that keeps the clinic moving, or one of the fundraisers. Are you the key fundraiser?
I am. I'm the Chief Development Officer for the
That's
Institute.
not fundraiser, or is that fundraiser?
It is a fundraiser,
Okay.
exactly. I am the person that works with a team, and I work very closely with Dr. Barlow, and I work very closely with our board of directors to raise the kind of investment we need. And it's approximately, 70% of our overall operating budget. So yes, it comes from philanthropy.
So, as I understand, we had a brief conversation earlier. You have a research arm, you have a treatment arm, I assume, in patients and so on like that. Does part of the funding that you raise go towards treatment, or is it mainly research?
Absolutely. Majority of our funding does go towards a lot of our scientific research. We have a clinic, our clinical trials, and ancillary, as Dr. Barlow mentioned, which is physical therapy, speech therapy. We're doing a lot even genetics and also stem cell research. We work a lot with industry, so yes, it's being fully funded, a lot of that, not all, but through philanthropy.
Great. So I want to come back to you about this, this distribution within the age group where Parkinson starts to occur. You said that you indicated there were some people in the mid-late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Is that distribution more or less equal or symmetrical across the population?
It's not. And so there are fewer people who are diagnosed very young, in their 20s and 30s. Then it starts to get a little bit more in their 40s. And then the big peak is in the 50s, and then it narrows down in the 60s, 70s, and very rarely in the 80s. And so it's really the 50s and 60s are where most people are diagnosed. But I think a lot of people think it's a disease of aging because if you have a really good doctor and really good care, you can live with your disease and manage your life for a long time. for hopefully up to 20 or 30 years if we do everything right. And hopefully during that time, the Parkinson's Institute is going to be able to find a way to stop the disease.
Yes. What are the early symptoms that a person could notice?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about this is no two patients are alike. So one of the things that our doctors, our movement disorder specialists say is once you've seen one Parkinson's patient, you've seen one Parkinson's patient. And so it's a very complicated disease. It affects multiple parts of the body. It affects the GI tract or the gut. It affects the nerves around the heart. It affects the nerves around the bladder. And it affects the nerves in the brain. And so for some people, the earliest problem they have is a problem with their gut. And they don't have a tremor. And they've had those problems for up to 10 years, and then they start getting, say, for example, a little clumsy with their feet. And someone then thinks maybe you have Parkinson's, and then they go to get the diagnosis. The most common one is the one that is the most obvious to the typical clinicians that aren't movement disorder specialists is a little bit of a tremor on one side, not on both sides.
But I read that this is kind of late in the cycle, meaning that you've already got it, damage has been done. This is the first truly physical manifestation. If I could move back a little to that gut issue, would it be that I have if I had early signs, a digestive issue? Would it be maybe a little bit of pain or discomfort? Are there any symptoms there?
Yeah, so what a lot of people think is that I have reflux disease.
Oh,
so
yes.
they've never had it in their whole life. They're not overweight. They don't have any risk factors for reflux. And all of a sudden, they feel like they have reflux. But what it really is that the nervous system that controls the GI tract or the entire gut, so from your swallowing all the way to the other side, which we will not say for the purpose of the show, the entire nervous system that controls that is being attacked by the same process that's attacking the brain. And that process is a process where a protein that normally is really movable starts to get clumped up. So when you fry an egg, you first put it on the fry pan, all that beautiful white area is clear. You could run your finger through it, but so it's a mobile protein unit. When you fry it up, it turns white, and you can't push your finger through that. It is a hard set of clumped proteins. So that's what's happening. There's clumping of this abnormal protein, and it's clogging up all the ability for things to move through the cell. And it starts when it happens in the enteric nervous system, patients think they have reflux, but what it is when they're trying to swallow, there's a really complicated system of valves. Because obviously you're swallowing, so this is contracting. There's a closed thing that's contracting against, which has to open up on cue. And then the food goes down. And then it needs to close again. Because if it doesn't close again, the food goes right back up. And that's typical reflux disease.
This reflux, as I understand, is the regurgitation, if I can use that word, of stomach acid and half-digested food, which has got all kinds of burn your throat to some extent.
And that's
right?
what people think they have. But what they actually have is when this esophagus is saying, contract, contract, this thing is supposed to open. Well, it's not opening. And so the person's continuing to eat, and the food is just backing up. And that's why it feels like regurgitation, but it's not reflux. Reflux disease is when this valve is damaged and it stays open too much, and the stomach contacts are going up. But for a typical patient, it just feels like they've got food coming up all the time. And that's the same in other areas of the GI tract.
So that's one of the earliest symptoms that a person could notice.
Exactly. And the other one is constipation, which of course nobody likes to talk about.
It's okay. This is an open forum
Good,
show. We can say anything we want.
All right.
With at least the scientific terms.
Perfect.
Okay.
So a lot of people have problems where they think, gosh, I've never had constipation in my life, and now I'm feeling really constipated. I feel bloated, and I don't feel like when I go to the bathroom that I'm really going to the bathroom all the way. Something comes out, but it's not all coming out. And again, it's not the typical constipation where you then should take a lot of fiber to help it go through. That actually in Parkinson's makes it worse. Because once again, the problem is you're supposed to be contracting and then another sphincter is supposed to be releasing, but it's not. And so it's pushing and pushing and pushing, and maybe a little bit gets out, but the majority is still stuck. And so it builds up, and people think they have constipation. But if you put more fiber into the system, all you do is make more and more stuff that can't get out.
I see.
And so a lot of people struggle with all these GI symptoms. They go to the gastroenterologist, the GI specialist. They try this, they try that, nothing gets better. And in fact, our partnering neurogastroenterologist has diagnosed many cases of Parkinson's before the tremor even came because of this very specific abnormality.
So Joy, let me come back and bring you into the conversation here. Do you see Parkinson's broadly distributed across society, or is it in certain geographic areas, certain types of people in terms of size, or even other genetic type-oriented markers?
I think, you know, again, what I do is mainly focusing a lot on the philanthropy. Obviously, I work with a lot of the patients. We deal with the patients every day. We tell the patient stories. You know, to answer your question, I mean, this is something that Dr. Barlow has worked on for decades. I think, to me, this is obviously a national issue, right? International issue. The Parkinson's Institute and Clinical Center is focused on everything that's happening in America. In fact, we want to become, and we are, a destination hospital. This is interesting because we are going to be forming a relationship with El Camino Hospital. We're going to be on the campus of El Camino Hospital in June of 2019. So with that, we're going to be able to partner with all of their specialty groups, along with our movement disorder neurologists. It's going to be a very multidisciplinary, integrated relationship that's going to offer our patients so many more options with this relationship.
What are some of the options? I just want to explore that for a minute.
Yes.
Is it that they're going to have a hospital there plus the clinical research that you do?
Yeah, so right now, with us located in Sunnyvale, it's a wonderful place, and it is a destination clinic. People fly from all over the country and all over the world to come and see us. But when we get there, there's diagnostic things that we need to send them for, and so they need to go to a different place to do that and a different place to do that. And with Parkinson's, that's particularly difficult because moving and driving, all of the things we take for granted, are actually quite difficult. Navigating new places, getting on and off of an elevator is extremely challenging because the elevator opens and they've got to do that whole workaround before it closes. And so that's a very stress-inducing issue for patients. So by being located on a hospital campus, if a patient needs an MRI or a CAT scan, a brain scan, they can just go straight down, go over, take a few steps, go and get the scan, and then interact with our doctors. The same with our teams of other folks that help us with that. So being on the campus is going to be very helpful to make it easier for our patients. But the other thing is that people with Parkinson's, they get all the same things we all do. They get a torn ligament in their shoulder and need to have arthroscopic surgery. They get a gallbladder attack and need their gallbladder out. They get back problems and need spine surgery. But when they go into the hospital, they have a much higher complication rate by almost 30% than people without Parkinson's, who are otherwise the same. And it's because people don't know how to manage Parkinson's in the hospital. So they fall more. They're more susceptible to getting infections. This GI issue is not understood, and so people can have major issues with GI tract. And so being on the campus will also allow us to ensure that we're partnering with the hospital staff so that patients with Parkinson's who need to be hospitalized really have the kind of care that will allow them to get through their reversible condition and not have the Parkinson's create even more problems for them.
So I wanted to spend a minute about the discussion we had earlier about how the GI, gastrointestinal tract, is maybe the solution to addressing and arresting, if I can use that term, the development of Parkinson's. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that some of our patients have GI problems even before they get a tremor. And as you said, which was very insightful, by the time you have a tremor, more than 80% of those brain cells are already gone. And so it doesn't lead to us being able to intervene early enough. We, from our own research, a very large study that we're doing, and we're grateful for industry support and philanthropy for funding it, together with our partner researchers, think we have identified that for many people, it looks like something from the GI tract, the so-called microbiome, is entering the nerves of the enteric nervous system, which is the gut brain. People call it the second brain or the gut brain. enter into those neurons, and then it causes that protein to aggregate, but then it spreads to the next neuron up the chain and it aggregates, and then the next one, and the next one, until it reaches a part of the nervous system called the vagus nerve, which you have on each side, and that vagus nerve directly communicates to the brain, and then that's how it starts to get into the brain and march up to the brain. And if we can identify our patients very early and intervene before that process has crawled all the way up into the brain, we think that's one of the most important things we could do, because that essentially will look like a cure. So we still will have to manage the GI problems, but it's not going to progress.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're hoping for.
Is this probably going to be some type of drug treatment, or maybe even some type of immunization, do you think?
Well, there's a couple different approaches.
Okay.
One of the ways that we think are very promising and that we're leading the way in is drug treatment. Drug treatment that you put in very early, in the earliest stages of the disease, that can block the propagation up into the brain. And there are several different therapies we're testing right now in a model system that could then be ready for the clinic late next year or in 2020 and 2021. In addition, there's an ongoing trial that we're just launching, which is like an antibody therapy against this protein. And that's where you have another protein that knows this protein and grabs it and prevents it from propagating. And that's called therapeutic antibodies.
I see.
And that study is being conducted at our institute as well. So it could be a combination of different things. And we're there at the forefront of trying every one of them in hopes that we're going to be there to find a cure.
So Joy, you're the person that's got to provide the funding for all this research. Is that right?
Well, like I said, it's a team, and
Okay.
yes.
You lead the team, though.
Yeah, I do. I lead our philanthropy team, and I work very collaboratively with Dr. Barlow. I work with the board. We have an amazing board. But yeah, I mean, you can't really do in the nonprofit sector. I've been doing this for over 20 years to really, be able to raise the funds you need to do your program.
What is the message you give people? Like, you may get this, or you may know somebody has this, or this is a problem worth solving. What is the underlying?
I think it's all the above.
Okay.
We are a one-stop shop. Our goal is to find a cure. And if
Let's say you find that cure. How do you deploy it? Do you go to a large pharmaceutical company, or how do you go about distributing this?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really great about the Institute is it's a standalone entity. It's a nonprofit standalone entity. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to be innovative and entrepreneurial. It also means Joy has a lot of work to do to raise money, because we don't have any tax dollars coming in and things like that, like the universities do. But by having this innovative entrepreneurial way, we've already partnered up front, so that if we find something, there's a path to the market, so that every patient will have access to the drug. And that's a critical component of what we do. So everything we do, we focus very early on. If we spend the resources to do this research, whether it's in the clinic or in the basic science, it's all partnering in a way that, if it's successful, we already have an industry partner who will make sure that it gets into the market by FDA approval. And so that's part of our vision and mission.
Who owns the intellectual property? Does the nonprofit own it, or does does your partner own it?
Yeah, so it's different for different partnerships.
Okay.
So for example, we actually did discover on our own, in part of our research about 8 years ago, a intervention that could help with dyskinesias. So everyone's like, what's a dyskinesia?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, so dys means abnormal, and kinesia is movement. So dyskinesia, abnormal movement. Well, Parkinson's people have tremors, and they have difficulty initiating movement, which is called bradykinesia, slow movement. That's Parkinson's. The drugs that we use to treat Parkinson's is to replace dopamine, which is the main neurotransmitter that's being lost. Well, it's only lost in a certain part of the brain, but we give it orally and it gets everywhere in the brain. So there's other parts of the brain that have enough dopamine, and now it's getting too much dopamine, and that causes abnormal movements. So when you see people doing a lot of this and they're having a hard time sitting on the chair, that's not Parkinson's. That's the side effect of their medication. And we discovered something in the laboratory that could manage the side effect And so for that one, we discovered it, we moved it forward, and we've licensed it to a company called Chronotherapeutics, who's now advancing it into a product. So for that one, you know, there's a different, we own the IP and we licensed it. For others, we think there are therapeutics that could be helpful for Parkinson's, but it's the drug companies. And then what we do is we convince them to spend the money, which is $100 to $200 million just to get to what's called proof of concept, then another $500 to $700 million to get it to the market. We partner with them to generate that proof of concept data with them. But obviously, that's their investment, and they own the IP.
Yeah, well, of course, it's a huge investment and risk also.
And risk.
So Joy, I wanted to give you an opportunity to send a message to our audience. How should they connect to you if they're interested? What are the events that are coming up? And how do they contact the organization?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, they can contact us at we're at thepi.org. I think what's important is we're in the community. We've launched a large capital campaign. We have a great event coming up on May 19th at Baylord Park here in Sunnyvale. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's welcome with we're going to have lots of family, lots of great food. It's approximately about a 2-mile walk. We had about a little over, or approximately between 500 plus individual walkers that came out last year. We're going to be having a lot of information going out over the next few months. We're welcoming the whole community here in Silicon Valley to come out and walk with us. We also have another event coming up in September on the 16th. Actually, the whole street in Danville, it's called the Danville d'Elegance event. It's a car show. If you like cars, it's going to have some amazing cars, lots of antique cars and
some self-driving cars?
Exactly. We should have some self-driving cars.
Good.
But we do a lot, and we're all about community, and at the end of the day, we're in this together.
Well, that's very good. Well, I'm getting the signal here. I want to really thank you, Joy, and you, Dr. Barlow, for coming. And you really provided tremendous insight to me and the audience about Parkinson's. I had no idea all these options and all these variations were there, and probably had no idea what the early symptoms might be and where people could look. So I want to thank you for giving us that very interesting explanation and some insights to the potential remedies that are coming down the line. And Joy, I want to also thank you, and I want to wish both of you every success going forward. This is Jim Conor. Thank you for joining us tonight's show on Silicon Valley Buzz. Each month we'll feature a new set of guests who will talk about new happenings in Silicon Valley. See you next week.